I spent good money on fishing bait that barely worked, and then I tried something that honestly sounded stupid. I mixed 3 fruits from my kitchen into a simple dough and used it as bait. No special formula, no brand, nothing expensive. Just a quick mix that took a few minutes to make. But the moment it hit the water, something felt different. The bites weren't random taps anymore. Fish were slowing down, circling, and actually committing in a way I didn't expect. At first, I thought it was luck. But it kept happening. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about what I was using, but how fish were reacting to it. Because if something this simple can outperform what most people rely on, then there has to be a reason behind it. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly what I used, how I made it, and more importantly, why this works so well underwater. The idea behind this experiment didn't come from trying something random. It came from noticing a pattern that most anglers overlook, especially when they fish in waters where pressure is high and fish are constantly exposed to the same types of bait. In those conditions, fish don't just react based on hunger. They react based on experience. Over time, they start to recognize repeated signals, especially strong artificial scents that appear over and over again. What once triggered an aggressive bite can slowly turn into hesitation. So instead of asking how to make bait stronger, I started asking how to make it feel more natural. Not weaker, but more believable. That's where fruit became interesting. In real ecosystems, fruits regularly fall into the water. They break apart, dissolve, and release sugars, acids, and organic compounds that fish have encountered many times before without any negative consequence. This creates a completely different reaction compared to synthetic attractants. But using a single fruit wasn't enough. A single scent is predictable. I wanted to create something layered, something that changes over time as it sits in the water. So the idea was simple but very intentional. Combine one ingredient that spreads scent quickly, one that provides lasting sweetness, and one that helps everything break down and disperse more efficiently. The goal wasn't just to attract fish into the area. It was to create a sequence. First attraction, then curiosity, then confidence, and finally commitment. And that sequence is what turns a simple bite into a successful catch. Now let's get into the actual bait, because this is where most people either overcomplicate things or miss the point completely. This isn't about mixing random ingredients. Every part of this $5 bait has a specific role, and the way they work together is what makes the difference. The base of the bait is a ripe banana. It costs almost nothing, but it does 2 important things at once. First, it creates a soft and natural texture that fish can easily bite into without resistance. Second, it releases a slow, steady sweetness that doesn't overwhelm the water but stays present over time. Then comes the strawberry syrup. This is the fastest acting part of the bait. The moment it hits the water, it begins to spread outward, creating an immediate scent signal that pulls fish into the area. Unlike many artificial attractants, it smells familiar rather than aggressive, which reduces hesitation. The third component is orange juice, and this is where things get more interesting. The acidity slightly breaks down the structure of the bait, allowing small particles and scent molecules to escape gradually. Instead of losing all its scent at once, the bait creates a continuous release that fish can follow. Finally, a small amount of flour is added to control consistency. It keeps the bait on the hook while still allowing it to soften and break apart naturally once submerged. What you end up with isn't just cheap bait. It's a system that releases attraction in stages, and that's what makes fish stay longer and commit instead of just striking and leaving. To really understand why this bait works so well, you have to look at how fish actually make decisions in the water. Because they don't just bite based on hunger. They react based on a combination of instinct, experience, and environmental signals. Species like carp, catfish, and tilapia rely heavily on chemical detection, especially in conditions where visibility is low or the water is slightly murky. In those situations, scent becomes more important than sight. When a fish detects something in the water, it doesn't immediately attack. It follows the scent gradient, moving slowly toward the source while continuously evaluating whether that signal feels safe or not. This is where most baits fail. They attract attention, but they also introduce doubt. Strong artificial scents can trigger curiosity, but they can also feel unnatural, which causes fish to hesitate or strike and instantly release. That's why you often get quick taps but no solid hook. This fruit-based bait behaves differently. The sweetness from the banana and syrup signals energy, something worth investigating. The acidity from the orange creates a natural breakdown pattern that fish associate with real food sources. Together, these signals create familiarity rather than suspicion. And that leads to the most important factor of all, confidence. When a fish feels confident, it doesn't just test the bait. It commits. It takes it in longer, giving you a real chance to react. And that single difference, confidence versus hesitation, is what turns more bites into more catches. To see if this was actually consistent, I didn't just rely on one good moment. I set up a direct comparison. Same location, same time window, and as close to identical conditions as possible. The only difference was the bait. I started with a typical setup that many anglers would recognize. Strong scent, designed to attract quickly, something that should perform well on paper. And to be fair, it did bring fish in. I could see movement. I felt a few taps, but most of those interactions ended the same way. Quick contact, then nothing. The fish would investigate, but not fully commit. Then I switched to the fruit bait. The first thing I noticed wasn't more action, it was different action. The bites were slower, more deliberate. Instead of sharp taps, I felt steady pressure. Fish weren't just testing the bait, they were holding it. That changed everything. Because the longer a fish holds the bait, the more time you have to react. That means better hook sets, fewer missed chances, and more consistency overall. As the session continued, the pattern became clear. The number of bites started to even out, but the quality of those bites was completely different. And that's when it really clicked. It wasn't about which bait attracted more fish. It was about which bait made fish commit. By the end of this test, the result was clear, but more importantly, the reason behind it became even clearer. It wasn't that the fruit bait was magically better. It was that it aligned more closely with how fish actually experience the world. While most baits try to force a reaction with intensity, this one worked by reducing resistance. It didn't shock the fish into biting. It allowed them to feel comfortable enough to commit. And that's a completely different approach. For something that costs just a few dollars to make, it changes the entire equation. You're not relying on expensive formulas or hoping a stronger scent will do the job. You're creating something that feels natural, something that fish recognize without hesitation. That's why the bites felt different. That's why they lasted longer. And that's why the results were more consistent. Because in the end, fishing isn't just about attracting fish. It's about convincing them. So the next time you're thinking about what bait to use, don't just ask what's popular or what costs more. Ask what makes sense to the fish. Because sometimes, the simplest and cheapest option isn't just good enough. It's actually better.